Hey guys, it's Chris from Hefty Fabworks here. Today we're going to be doing a quick install video on a Nissan Xterra here for our new radiator skid for the Nissan Xterra. It's the second generation, as well as the second generation Frontier and the new third generation Frontier. The install is going to be the same across the board, so we're going to go ahead and get started. In your package you'll receive a hardware kit that contains 4 M12 125 thread bolts, 4 large washers, 6 smaller washers, 2 M8 bolts, and 4 3/8" bolts. You'll also receive 2 steel frame brackets as well as the main aluminum skid plate. Alright, the first step is we're going to remove the factory skid plate. This is going to have a series of bolts up through these holes on the front bumper as well as down in the lower section here. You're going to use an M12 either socket or impact to pull those off. We do recommend when you are installing the skid not to use an impact driver, as the bolts that are threaded into the frame are really fragile and they will break off in the frame. Alright, the next step after we've removed the factory skid plate is to remove the factory tow hook. This can be installed after the fact. If you do want to retain that factory tow hook, we can put that back in afterwards. But we're going to use a 18 millimeter, actually, no it's not, it's a 17. After removing the tow hook on the passenger side, we're going to install our new frame brackets. In this video, these brackets have not been coated, but we do recommend that you either paint them or coat them. They are raw steel when you receive these, so they will need a coating prior to installation. But for demonstration purposes, you're going to take this bracket with the angle facing back down and go ahead and start your bolts up in the top frame using the M12 bolts and the large flat washers. At this point, if you want to install your factory tow hook, you can do that as well. We do recommend, if you're going to do that, to reuse the factory bolts that you pulled out of the tow hook. You'll notice that the nuts that are welded to the bracket are facing towards the inside of the vehicle. We're using a 19 millimeter socket for this, and we're going to take these up and make sure that they're still a little bit loose when we finish out so that we can attach the skid. We don't want to lock it into place until all the way at the end. Next step is going to be to install the aluminum skid plate, and the first thing you're going to do is run this back up on the stock bumper. It's going to kind of go up underneath the factory bumper here. But what you need to do is figure out which of the holes in the lower crossmember that this is going to go into. And so you can just line up your skid and you'll figure out which of the holes. There's 4 of them in there that are threaded. We're only using 2. So once you figure out which holes those are, go ahead and pull your skid down. And you're going to go ahead and start your M8 bolts up into the frame here. And these bolts these holes will actually be the opposite of the holes that hold the factory skid plate on. So there's 2 that hold the factory skid plate on. We're going to be using the inside 2. Alright, we slid the skid plate up underneath the factory bumper. Now what we're going to do, we've got the 2 lower bolts just kind of sitting there holding it in place. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to align our skid plate on the side bolts to the bracket and go ahead and do our install on those side bolts. Those are the 3/8" bolts with the fender washers. And we'll tighten everything down after all the bolts are started. All right, now that we've got the skid plate up in place, all of the bolts are started, We're going to go ahead and start tightening everything down. We'll start with the with these lower bolts. It's going to be a 13mm socket, and all we're going to do is drive these up until they're snug. And this skid plate is designed to work with our engine skid. If you're using the factory engine skid, you will have to make some minor modifications to the factory engine skid to make it compatible with this skid plate. And then moving from there, we're going to go back up to our side bolts. This is going to be a 9/16 inch. And all we're going to do is just snug those up against that bracket. Avoiding using an impact gun, as the nuts that are welded inside the frame aren't welded very good from Nissan, and they do have a tendency, if they're over torqued, to break loose. So if you do run into any sort of tension on threading these in, it's always good to get a tap and actually run a tap through and chase the threads in the bolt or in the nut that's in the frame, just to make sure that you don't end up over torquing and causing that bolt to break loose in the frame. Once that bolt breaks loose, it's not a fun thing to fix. And that is the install of the skid. If you are running the factory bumper, there are 4 additional holes in the front edge of the skid plate. We do provide some stainless steel bolts for those, and basically we're just going to run that bolt up through in the same positions here, and you can actually get that tied in so that you can tie your front bumper into the front of the skid, and that way you can use this skid plate with the factory bumper. If you're not using the factory bumper, obviously the skid plate install is done at this point. One of the things that we've done on this new design is we actually removed the access panel for the oil filter access. The reason we did that is for 2 reasons. Number one, that access panel actually created a weak point in the skid plate, and we were really focused on trying to make sure that this is the strongest skid that we can possibly put out there while still maintaining the lightweight of the skid, but the durability that we need for a skid plate. So what we've done on this change on this new model is we've actually increased the thickness of the aluminum to a 1/4 inch aluminum. We've added the steel uprights, which adds a lot of rigidity and support to the upward forces that we have seen applied to these skids, and we removed that access panel. In order to do an oil change, it's still very simple. All you're going to do is just remove these 2 outside bolts on each side and loosen the bottom bolt, and that whole bottom skid plate will come right off. So it's not a whole lot more work than just removing that access panel, and it gives you a lot more access to the oil filter. So that's one of the reasons that we removed that access panel. Overall, it's a lot stronger design than our previous model, and personally, it's a cleaner look. So should give you a couple benefits. Obviously, we can still add the factory tow hook back in, which we couldn't on the old model. And we've got this thing set up so it really can take a lot of abuse. Give us a call if you got any questions, or you're looking at ordering a set of skid plates for your Nissan or Toyota, and happy trails.